The crystal fields of Verdana sparkled under the light of 3 moons, their surfaces reflecting rainbow patterns across Nova's face as she tended to her experimental garden. Her violet eyes focused intently on a rare specimen of bioluminescent flora, its petals pulsing with a gentle blue glow. As the leading botanist in the settlement of Haven, she had spent years developing plants that could sustain life on less hospitable worlds. The peaceful evening shattered as shadows fell across her greenhouse. Nova looked up to see 3 figures in sleek battle armor, their faces obscured behind obsidian masks. The insignia of the Syndicate, a crimson serpent devouring its tail, gleamed on their shoulders. Her heart stopped. Everyone knew of the Syndicate, the most notorious slave traders in the Outer Rim. "This is the one," a metallic voice announced. "The botanist who created the adaptive crops. She'll fetch a premium from the mining colonies." Nova's fingers curled around her pruning shears. "I won't go quietly," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. The lead slaver laughed, the sound distorted through his mask's filter. "They never do." The fight was brief but fierce. Nova managed to wound one with her shears before another hit her with a neural disruptor. Her muscles seized, and she collapsed among her beloved plants. As consciousness faded, she saw her assistant Theron watching from the shadows, his expression guilty. He had betrayed her. Nova awakened in a cramped cell aboard a Syndicate vessel. The space barely allowed her to stand, and the only light came from a dim strip above the door. Her cellmates, a dozen other captured beings from various species, huddled in similar enclosures along the corridor. The air tasted stale, recycled too many times through aging filters. A young celestial named Luna occupied the cell beside her. Her ethereal, translucent skin glowed faintly in the darkness. "They took you from Verdana?" she asked softly. "I'm sorry. The Syndicate has been targeting scientists lately. Anyone who can help them terraform their mining worlds." Nova pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall. "My whole life's work, they'll use it to exploit more planets, create more slaves." The thought made her sick. Days blurred together in the darkness of space. The slavers fed them minimal rations and spoke only to issue threats. Nova learned from her fellow captives that they were bound for the obsidian mines of Tartarus, a hellish world where few survived their first year. She refused to accept this fate. At night, while others slept, she studied the ship's rhythms, the guard rotations, the subtle vibrations of the engines, the electronic hum of the cell doors. Her scientific mind catalogued every detail, searching for weaknesses. But it was during one of these quiet observations that everything changed. The ship suddenly lurched, alarms blaring through the corridors. Nova was thrown against her cell door as weapons fire echoed through the hull. "We're under attack," a guard shouted, his boots pounding past the cells. Luna pressed against their shared wall. "Listen," she whispered. "That sound, it's a Terran ship." Nova had heard stories of the humans, a species that had emerged from their isolated world to find a galaxy in chains, and had decided to break them. They were fewer in number than most spacefaring races, but their determination and ingenuity made them formidable allies, or enemies. The battle that followed shook the entire vessel. Nova could hear the panic in the slavers' voices as they coordinated their defense. Something had them truly frightened, not just concerned, but terrified. "It's the Phoenix," someone whispered down the cell block. "The human who hunts slavers." A massive explosion rocked the ship, and emergency lights bathed the corridor in crimson. Through the chaos, Nova heard heavy footsteps approaching, different from the slavers' hurried pace. These were measured, confident. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor, backlit by flames. Tall and imposing in black combat armor, with no insignia or markings. Not Syndicate. Not military. Something else entirely. The figure raised a weapon, and Nova's cell door exploded outward in a shower of sparks. As the smoke cleared, she found herself looking into the faceplate of a human combat helmet. Behind the darkened visor, she caught a glimpse of determined eyes. "My name is Commander Raven Harper," a deep voice announced. "And you're all free now." Nova stepped out of her cell on shaking legs, her heart pounding with equal measures of fear and hope. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would change not only her fate but the lives of countless others across the galaxy. This was just the beginning. Commander Raven Harper had seen his share of horrors in the decades since he'd left Earth's Defense Force, but the sight of slaves packed into cells never failed to ignite his fury. As he led the newly freed captives through the smoke-filled corridors of the Syndicate vessel, his tactical display tracked the movements of his small but efficient crew securing the ship. "Bridge is clear, Commander," Lieutenant Sage's voice crackled through his calm, 3 Syndicate officers in custody. "You won't believe what we found in their navigation logs." Raven guided Nova and the others into his ship, the Liberty's Ghost. Unlike the cold, sterile environment of the slave vessel, the Ghost felt alive. Warm lights illuminated corridors painted in deep blues and grays, and the air carried the fresh scent of earth pine, a reminder of home that Raven maintained even in the depths of space. "Get everyone to medical," he ordered his crew. "Zara, full scan for tracking devices. The Syndicate loves their insurance policies." The ship's medical officer, a woman with cybernetic augments gleaming at her temples, nodded and began directing the freed captives to the medbay. Nova lingered behind, her violet eyes fixed on Raven as he removed his helmet. The face beneath was weathered but young, with a scar running along his jaw and eyes that had seen too much. "You're really him," she said. "The Phoenix. The one they whisper about in the Outer Rim." Raven's expression remained neutral. "Just a ghost story the slavers tell to scare each other." He turned to head to the bridge, but Nova caught his arm. Her touch was gentle but firm, and he found himself pausing. "My research," she said urgently. "The Syndicate wants it to terraform mining worlds. They'll enslave thousands more. I need to stop them." Before Raven could respond, Sage's voice cut through the ship's calm again. "Commander, those NAV logs. They're coordinates to every major Syndicate holding in the sector. Including their main research facility on Nexus Prime." Nova's grip tightened on Raven's arm. "That's where they'll take my work. My plants could survive anywhere, adapt to any environment. In the wrong hands, they become tools of oppression," Raven finished. He studied her for a moment, seeing the same fire in her eyes that had driven him to leave Earth's military and wage his private war against slavery. "Lieutenant Sage, set course for the medical station on Haven's Ring. We'll drop off the other survivors there." "And then?" Nova asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Then we pay a visit to Nexus Prime." Raven headed toward the bridge, Nova following close behind. "But first, tell me everything you know about your research and the Syndicate's plans." In the ship's conference room, Nova laid out the details of her work, revolutionary botanical engineering that could accelerate terraforming processes from decades to months. In the right hands, it could transform uninhabitable worlds into sanctuaries. In the Syndicate's grip, it would create perfect labor camps. As she spoke, Raven noticed the way her hands moved, drawing patterns in the air, her passion for the science evident despite her exhaustion. The other freed captives were resting in medical, but Nova seemed energized by purpose. "The Syndicate's research facility will be heavily guarded," Sage warned, pulling up holographic schematics. "And after this rescue, they'll be expecting us." "Let them," Raven said quietly. "Fear makes people sloppy. We'll use that." Nova stepped closer to the hologram, her expression determined. "I can help. I know the research protocols, the security systems they use in laboratories. And I have a score to settle." Raven started to object. Civilians didn't belong on raid missions, but something in Nova's stance stopped him. She had survived Syndicate capture, had protected her mind and spirit in circumstances that broke many. She wasn't asking permission, she was stating a fact. If you're coming, he said finally, you train with us. Starting now. The next few days aboard the Liberty's Ghost took on an intense rhythm. Between dropping off the other survivors and plotting their approach to Nexus Prime, Raven and his crew worked to prepare Nova for combat. She learned to handle basic weapons, to move in armor, to think tactically. But it was during the quiet moments that Raven found himself most intrigued. He'd catch her in the ship's small hydroponics bay, tending to the plants with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with her fierce determination in training. One evening, he found her studying a small flower that had bloomed despite the artificial environment. "Life finds a way," she said without looking up. "That's what I always believed. It's why I created my adaptive plants. To help life flourish in impossible places." She turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the soft glow of the hydroponics lights. "I never imagined they'd be used to create impossible prisons instead." Raven stepped closer, seeing not just the scientist or the determined fighter, but someone who, like him, had seen their dreams twisted by the cruelty of others. "We'll stop them," he promised. "And then we'll use your work the way it was meant to be used." Nova's expression softened for a moment, then hardened with resolve. "First we have to infiltrate one of the most secure facilities in the sector." "About that," Raven said, a slight smile tugging at his scarred lip. "I have a plan. But you're not going to like it." As the Liberty's Ghost cut silently through space toward Nexus Prime, neither Nova or Raven could have predicted how their mission would reshape not only their lives but the balance of power in the entire sector. The real question was, were they ready for what awaited them in the heart of the Syndicate's domain? The plan, as Raven had predicted, was not one Nova liked. She stood in the cargo hold of the Liberty's Ghost, dressed in the elaborate robes of a Syndicate researcher, her violet eyes now hidden behind brown contact lenses. The outfit felt like a betrayal of everything she stood against, but she understood the necessity. "Your credentials are perfect," Lieutenant Sage said, making final adjustments to Nova's forged identification chip. "Dr. Nara Voss, transferred from the Helios branch. The Syndicate's own systems will confirm your identity." Raven entered the cargo hold in full combat gear, his black armor absorbing the light. Only his helmet was missing, allowing Nova to see the concern etched on his face. "Last chance to back out," he said quietly. Nova lifted her chin. "Not a chance. Besides, your plan falls apart without a real botanical expert." She touched the small communicator hidden in her ear. "I just wish you had a better extraction strategy than improvise and explode things." A rare smile crossed Raven's face. "That strategy has kept me alive for 10 years. Statistics suggest you're due for a failure," Nova muttered, but there was no real fear in her voice. Something about Raven's presence made even this suicidal plan seem possible. The Liberty's Ghost dropped out of hyperspace behind one of Nexus Prime's 3 moons. The massive research facility hung in space before them, a sprawling complex of interconnected stations and laboratories. Security ships patrolled in precise patterns, their weapons ready to vaporize any unauthorized vessels. "Remember," Raven said as Nova prepared to board the small shuttle that would take her to the facility, "you have 3 hours to locate your research and plant the charges. When the first explosion hits, head to extraction point Beta. Don't try to wait for us if something goes wrong." Nova paused at the shuttle's door. "What about you?" "I'll be causing a distraction." His expression darkened. "A very big distraction." The approach to the facility was tense but smooth. Nova's credentials passed every security check, her story of being transferred to assist with the terraforming project accepted without question. As she walked through the sterile white corridors, she forced herself to adopt the cold demeanor of a Syndicate scientist. The laboratory level was exactly as she had feared. Her carefully developed plants, meant to bring life to dead worlds, were being modified for maximum yield with minimum sustainability. They weren't meant to create permanent colonies, only temporary work camps that would be abandoned once the resources were stripped. "Impressive work," a voice said behind her. Nova turned to see a tall man in a syndicate director's uniform. Dr. Voss, isn't it? I'm Director Thane. Your reputation precedes you. Nova's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. The original research was brilliant, she said, letting contempt color her tone. But clearly designed by someone with no understanding of practical applications. Thane smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Indeed. The original researcher was unfortunately unreceptive to our vision. But her work lives on. He gestured to the rows of modified plants. Soon, we'll have self-sustaining labor camps on a dozen worlds. Nova felt sick, but she forced herself to nod appreciatively. As she toured the facility with Thane, she carefully planted the explosive charges, each one disguised as a routine botanical sensor. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slow. 2 hours and 45 minutes into her mission, alarms blared through the facility. Nova allowed herself a small smile. Right on schedule. We're under attack. A security officer burst into the laboratory. It's the Phoenix. He's hitting the main reactor. Chaos erupted as scientists and guards rushed to secure their research. In the confusion, Nova slipped away from Thane, her fingers moving to the detonator hidden in her robes. She had almost reached extraction point Beta when a hand grabbed her arm. Going somewhere, Nova? Thane's voice was ice cold. The contact lenses. They must have detected them. Did you really think we wouldn't recognize the woman whose research we stole? Nova met his gaze steadily. Actually, I counted on it. She pressed the detonator. The laboratory level erupted in a series of precisely placed explosions. Nova's modified plants, along with all the research data, went up in flames. She drove her elbow into Thane's solar plexus and broke free, running toward the emergency airlocks. Through her communicator, she could hear the sounds of battle. Raven and his crew were engaged in a firefight near the reactor, drawing most of the security forces away from her position. But time was running out. Raven, she called through the comm, I could use that extraction right about now. Little busy, his voice crackled back, accompanied by the sound of explosions. Think you can make it to landing bay 4? Nova checked her position as she ran. Not without growing wings. Then I suggest you hold on to something. The entire station shuddered as the Liberty's Ghost burst through the landing bay doors, its weapons tearing through the facility's defenses. Nova felt the artificial gravity fluctuate as emergency force fields tried to compensate for the breach. She saw her chance. Using the fluctuating gravity to her advantage, she launched herself toward the Ghost's open cargo bay. For a moment, she was suspended in space, the cold vacuum pulling at her robes. Then strong arms caught her, pulling her inside as the ship's shield snapped back into place. Raven's helmet was scratched and scored, but she could see his eyes through the visor. Cutting it a bit close, he said, his voice tight with what might have been concern. Says the man who blew up a reactor, Nova shot back, but her hand lingered on his arm. They had done it. Her research was destroyed, and with it, the Syndicate's plans for their labor camps. As the Liberty's Ghost fled the burning facility, Nova looked back at the destruction. What happens now? She asked quietly. Raven removed his helmet, his expression unreadable. Now we make them pay for every life they've tried to enslave. All of them. He turned to her. That is, if you're still in. Nova thought of her peaceful gardens on Verdana, of the life she had lost. Then she looked at Raven, at his crew, at this ship of ghosts and freedom fighters. Try to leave me behind, she said, and you'll find out just how dangerous a botanist can be. The Liberty's Ghost drifted silently through the outer rim, its systems running dark to avoid detection. In the week since the destruction of the Syndicate's research facility, the price on their heads had tripled. Nova stood at the viewport in the ship's observation deck, watching distant stars blur past. Her hands absently tended to a small garden she had started, the plants providing both food and comfort for the crew. "You're up late," Raven's voice came from behind her. She didn't turn, but she could see his reflection in the transparent steel. He had discarded his armor for simple civilian clothes, making him look almost vulnerable. "The Syndicate will have backup facilities," she said, gently pruning a leaf. "Other copies of my research. That's not what's really keeping you awake." Raven moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I saw your face when we passed the notification about Verdana." Nova's hand stilled. The Syndicate had declared martial law on her homeworld, claiming to search for terrorist collaborators. Her people were suffering because of her actions, even if those actions had been right. "I knew there would be consequences," she said softly. I didn't expect to feel so responsible." "The responsibility lies with them, not you." Raven's voice carried the weight of experience. "The Syndicate uses guilt as a weapon. They want you to regret fighting back." Nova turned to face him. "Like they did with you? What made you start this war against them, Raven?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached up, tracing the scar along his jaw. "I was a peacekeeper for Earth's Defense Force. We discovered a Syndicate operation trafficking children from frontier colonies. My superiors ordered us to stand down, political complications." His eyes darkened with the memory. "I disobeyed. Saved the children, but my career was over. That's when I realized the system wasn't just broken, it was complicit." Nova reached out, her fingers brushing his scar. He didn't pull away. "So you became the Phoenix. A ghost story to frighten slavers." His smile was bitter. "But ghosts can't free people. Can't change things. That takes flesh and blood, and the willingness to sacrifice everything." Before Nova could respond, Lieutenant Sage's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, we've got something. Multiple distress signals from the Helios sector. Syndicate ships are hitting civilian targets." They rushed to the bridge, where Sage's hands flew over holographic displays. "They're attacking anyone they suspect of helping us. Research stations, medical facilities, civilian transports." Nova's breath caught as she saw the casualty numbers. "This is because of what we did." "No," Raven's voice was steel. "This is what they've always been. We just forced them to show their true face." He studied the tactical display. "How many ships are we looking at?" 3 heavy cruisers, multiple support vessels. They're moving in a pattern, hitting targets of opportunity. Sage highlighted their trajectory. "Next likely target is the Celestial Refugee Station in the Andromeda Belt." "Like Luna," Nova whispered, remembering her fellow captive from the slave ship. "There are thousands of displaced people there." Raven was already moving. "Sound battle stations. Plot an intercept course." "That's suicide," Sage protested. "We can't take on that many ships. We won't be alone." Nova's voice was firm. She stepped forward, accessing the ship's communication array. "The Syndicate made a mistake. They thought fear would keep people in line, but there's something stronger than fear." Her fingers flew over the controls, broadcasting on frequencies she knew other survivors would be monitoring. "What are you doing?" Raven asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "Calling in every person you've ever saved. Every slave you've freed, every life you've changed." She looked up at him. "You're not a ghost story, Raven. You're hope. And it's time to prove it." The response was immediate. Ships began appearing on their sensors, small fighters, merchant vessels converted for combat, even a few military deserters. Each one commanded by someone whose life had been touched by the Phoenix. "They're all broadcasting the same message," Sage reported, wonder in her voice. "The Phoenix calls, and we answer." Raven stared at the gathering fleet, emotion flickering across his usually stoic features. Nova moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "Still think ghosts can't change things?" He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was something like peace in his eyes. "Plot a course through the syndicate blockade," he ordered. "We have people to save." As the Liberty's Ghost led their makeshift armada toward battle, Nova felt something shift in the air, a sense that they were part of something larger than themselves. The syndicate had sought to break spirits through fear and isolation. Instead, they had forged bonds that would shake the foundations of their empire. "You know," Raven said quietly, his hand still in hers, "for a botanist, you make a pretty good revolutionary." Nova smiled, thinking of the gardens she had left behind on Verdana, and the new kind of growth she had found among the stars. "Plants teach us that life finds a way," she said. "Even in the darkest places. Especially there." The ship's alarm sounded, warning of their approach to the combat zone. Raven squeezed her hand once before letting go, both of them moving to their battle stations. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as commander and scientist, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals in a fight for something greater than themselves. Space erupted in fire as the rebel fleet engaged the syndicate cruisers near the Andromeda Belt. The Liberty's Ghost led the charge, its enhanced shields absorbing the first barrage of enemy fire. Nova stood at her station on the bridge, monitoring the tactical display as dozens of smaller ships swarmed the larger syndicate vessels like angry insects. "Refugee station reports evacuation 60% complete," Sage called out. "They need more time." Raven's hands flew over the helm controls, guiding the Ghost through a maze of weapons fire. "Then we'll give it to them." "Nova, status on their shields." Nova analyzed the readings from her station. "The lead cruisers using a frequency modulation I recognize from their research facilities. If I can match it." Her fingers danced across the console, and a beam of focused energy shot from the Ghost, cutting through the enemy ship's defenses like they weren't there. "I love it when you do science," Raven murmured, earning a small smile from Nova despite the chaos around them. The battle shifted as more ships arrived, not all of them friendly. Syndicate reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. But for every syndicate vessel that appeared, 2 more rebel ships joined the fight. Former slaves, displaced colonists, deserted military personnel, all answering the Phoenix's call. "Commander," Sage's voice was urgent, incoming transmission from the lead syndicate ship. It's Director Thane." The holographic display flickered to life, showing Thane's cold features. Burns marked one side of his face from their last encounter. "I must admit, Phoenix, you've become more than an irritant. Gathering an army of displaced refused to challenge us. Almost impressive." "Those displaced refuse are beating your fleet," Raven replied calmly, even as he maneuvered the Ghost through another barrage. "Perhaps. But ask yourself, how many innocents will die for your crusade?" Thane's smile was cruel. "We've already begun bombarding outer colonies. For every ship we lose here, a settlement burns. How many lives is your revolution worth?" Nova watched Raven's jaw clench, saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. But before he could respond, she stepped forward. "You still don't understand," she said, addressing Thane. "Every life you threaten, every world you burn, you're not creating fear anymore. You're creating allies." As if to prove her point, new signatures appeared on their sensors. Ships bearing the markings of the Outer Rim Alliance, officially neutral systems that had finally chosen a side. "Your mistake," Nova continued, "was thinking you could control people through pain. But pain breeds resistance. And now you've given everyone a reason to resist." Thane's expression darkened. "Then you'll all die together." The transmission cut off as the syndicate fleet launched a coordinated attack. But they were too late. The rebel fleet had already adapted to their patterns, and the refugee station reported its evacuation complete. Now it was time to end this. All ships, Raven broadcast to their allies, execute attack pattern Phoenix. Remember what we fought for. Remember who we fight for. The battle that followed would be spoken of for generations. Ships moved in intricate dances of destruction, survivors of oppression turning their pain into purpose. The Liberty's ghost darted between larger vessels, Nova's understanding of syndicate technology allowing them to strike at crucial weaknesses. But victory came at a cost. Rebel ships exploded in brilliant flares, their crews giving everything for a chance at freedom. Each loss hit Raven hard. Nova could see it in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his hands on the controls. The turning point came when Nova spotted a pattern in the Syndicate fleet's movements. They're protecting something, she realized, analyzing the data. That ship near the back, it's not a warship. It's their command center. Raven understood immediately. The entire Syndicate operation in this sector. All their data, their control systems, Nova confirmed. Destroy that ship, and their network collapses. But reaching it meant running a gauntlet of enemy fire that would likely destroy them. Raven looked at Nova, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. Together, he asked simply. She moved to stand beside him, her hand covering his on the ship's controls. Together. The Liberty's ghost dove through the chaos of battle, taking hits that made the hull scream. Nova's modifications to their shields held, barely. Other rebel ships moved to cover them, sacrificing themselves to give them a clear shot. In the final moments, as they bore down on the command ship, Raven turned to Nova. I never thought I'd find something worth living for, he said softly. I was content being a ghost. Nova's free hand cupped his cheek. You're not a ghost anymore. You're a phoenix, rising from ashes, bringing others with you. Their targeting systems locked onto the command ship's reactor core. Around them, the remnants of their fleet engaged the last Syndicate defenders. This was the moment, everything they had fought for, everyone they had lost, leading to this. For freedom, Nova whispered. For hope, Raven answered. They fired. The Syndicate command ship erupted in a cascade of explosions, taking with it the network that had controlled their operations across the sector. One by one, their remaining ships lost power, their crews surrendering as the system that had enslaved them crumbled. In the aftermath, as rescue ships tended to the wounded and freed ships celebrated their victory, Nova and Raven stood again at the Ghost's viewport. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the galaxy itself was acknowledging the change that had occurred. It's not over, Raven said, watching rebel ships begin organizing aid for the outer colonies. The Syndicate still controls other sectors. There will be more battles. Nova took his hand, intertwining their fingers. But now everyone knows they can be fought. And won. She looked up at him. So, where do we go from here? Raven pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Wherever the fight takes us. But this time, I'm not fighting just to destroy something. His voice softened. I'm fighting to build something. With you. As the Liberty's ghost set course for the next system that needed them, Nova thought of her gardens on Verdana. She had wanted to bring life to dead worlds. Instead, she had helped bring hope to a dying society. And in finding her own freedom, she had found something else, something that, like her beloved plants, would grow stronger with each passing day. Love, she realized, was the ultimate act of resistance. And together, they would help it bloom across the stars.